Hi, I'm Janet Gross. Welcome to Coping Today, a place where we talk about mental health and well-being. Today, we're focusing on a worldwide problem that has been with us domestically and internationally for longer than anybody even wants to think about, and that's the horror of human trafficking. Dr. Roy Salgado from the University of Holy Cross has specialized in working with survivors of human trafficking for many years, and you're here to talk about that with us today.
Yes, in my work, when I was going through my doctoral studies, I was specializing in sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse, and wanting to work with children who had been abused in that way so I could help them through their trauma and develop into healthy adults. And in that work, it kind of just took me into these interesting places of these experiences with children who were the survivors of not only sexual abuse, but trafficking, and individuals who are U.S.-born citizens who had been trafficked within their communities here in Louisiana, born and raised in Louisiana, but additionally, as a Spanish speaker, working with people from Latin America who had been trafficked and seeing how individuals from Honduras and other parts of Latin America in particular had been trafficked into the United States, and then those experiences that they had. Back in 2014 in particular, we had a huge migration wave of unaccompanied minors. We had about 1,400 unaccompanied minors in 2014 come into the Louisiana area, and they were coming through Brownsville, Texas, and processed and were provided with a sponsor here in Louisiana and have come into our school systems. And I was getting phone calls from schools. We have 60 students enrolled this semester that we hadn't had before. They're Spanish-only speakers. Can you counsel them? I'm like, no, I can't. I can't counsel 60 students. There's not enough time. And I would get a call the next day from another school. We have 80 students here. We have 40 students here. We have 25 students here, all within a matter of weeks, because in this particular year, there had been so many kids that had flooded our schools, 1,400 in the southeastern Louisiana area that had come from Latin America unaccompanied. Wow. So we started to provide services through the University of Holy Cross through this program called PB&J, Pro Bono and Justice. And so we were doing this, and we were working with attorneys and the New Orleans Family Justice Center and Catholic Charities and all these different organizations coming in to provide services and have counselors who were being trained, who are Spanish speakers, to go ahead and provide the service. So all of that to say that in that, we were discovering how many of these children had experienced being trafficked and sold over and over again throughout this process and into our communities.
Wow. Was it from their hometown, or was it along the way, or once they got here?
Great question. Many of them along the way, some of them once they had gotten here. There's some that they have periods of time where they had been unknown to their families. They had been sent from their country of origin to the U.S., expectant to be received by someone here, and then they were missing for some time until they were found and rescued. And during that time, they were being trafficked and repeatedly raped in different places, whether it had been in Mexico or Texas or wherever, but they had been repeatedly raped and sold over the course of a journey that they expected to have taken maybe a week or two, turned into a horror, a nightmare that turned into months or years.
And we don't even know if some didn't make it, right?
And we do know that some didn't make it. I have unfortunately worked with families who had an expectation of receiving their child that was sent over by a grandparent from somewhere in Latin America, expecting to see their child in 2 weeks, and they don't know anything.
Wow. The journey to freedom just turns into the nightmare.
Right.
Wow. That's horrifying. So there's a lot that we don't know about this. I mean, that was an eye-opening experience for you.
Right.
Because in just counseling kids who you didn't know where they came from, you found out what had happened to them.
And hearing the story over and over and over again, it transformed in my personal experience, in my professional experience, from 2001 till about 2006, it looked a certain way. It was what I had come to know as child sexual abuse. And then as the story started to progress with these different community groups, especially after Katrina in our area here, we had a large influx of Latin Americans coming over. And then in 2014, a large swath of unaccompanied minors coming over. starting to get these stories, of children who had experienced these things. And you hear one, you hear two, you hear a dozen, you hear 50, and then you start to put it together and you realize this is a trafficking situation that's happening. Conversely, here in Louisiana, we have a large Honduran community. We have Hondurans that have been here for decades, 60, 70 years. And so it's a natural stopping point for people from Honduras to make it here because there's a third cousin, a fourth cousin, somebody's related to somebody, and then they come to this area. So we're finding that a lot of these new arrivals, new unaccompanied minors, back in 2014, and then some that continue today, but the numbers aren't as large in our area as they had been. But a lot of these have experienced having been trafficked at some point in their life.
Wow. And since it was a prevalent story, you can say it's probably a common experience for many.
It's a common experience for many, unfortunately.
Wow. And the ones that, since that was, almost 9 years ago, whatever, what happened to them? Do you know?
Well, in the short term thereafter, some of them got a little respite from it in terms of they're now in a safe space. They were able to process what was going on and acquire the skills to be able to survive their trauma. It's not something that will ever go away.
Yeah.
It's something that they carry with them for the rest of their lives. But they have acquired some tools, if you will, that can make it more bearable. That cross is something that they can perhaps bear with ease because there are others there that are alongside with them helping them carry that cross. Others, however, struggle with it and have post-traumatic stress disorder, perhaps have developed some sort of personality disorder that goes along with it, and life is complicated.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna. Oh, before we go, let's give the number for the University of Holy Cross Counseling. This is a beautiful thing that they're doing still.
Yes, the University of Holy Cross and the Maronites of Holy Cross for the past 4 years have been offering free telemental health services to any resident of Louisiana. So if anyone is experiencing any type of distress of any type, they can just simply call the number on their screen and the administrative assistant will triage that call and you will have a counselor in training offering you services free of charge as long as you need through the University of Holy Cross's Counseling and Training Center.
Okay, great. And we'll have that number up throughout the show. Okay. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk with a priest here in Louisiana who opened a home, a refuge for victims of human trafficking. Stay with us.
Is it okay to call you Mom?
Of course you can.
Welcome back. We're continuing our conversation on the heartbreaking, horrifying reality of human trafficking. And we welcome Father Jeff Bahi from the Diocese of Baton Rouge and Father Chuck Swanson from the Archdiocese of Omaha. Both are joining us on Zoom, and we thank you for talking with us. I'm going to start right with you, Father Bahi. 5 years ago, you opened a home in Baton Rouge to care for adolescent female victims of human trafficking. Can you tell us about that?
That's great. Thank you. On January of 2018, we took our firstborn. I've been working with human trafficking since 2001, since I met a nun in Rome by the name of Sister Eugenia Bonetti, who is the founder of Slaves No More. And once you meet one of these children and you realize their story, it's not the type of story you walk away from and say, not my table. Somebody's got to help. We financed our first shelter in Lagos, Nigeria, for young girls being repatriated back to Nigeria after being sold on the continent. Our second shelter was right in back of the American Cemetery in Anzio Beach, in the home parish of St. Angelo Merici, the convent there. Then in 2018, we opened up in Baton Rouge. I spoke to Sister and said, Sister, I've got this money. I've had a tax-free corporation, and I'm willing to open up a shelter, but I won't do it without religious sisters. And very graciously and gratefully, we were able to get the Hospitality of Sisters of Mercy, which is an Italian foundation, and they're around the world. And so we now have 5 sisters, 2 from India, 1 from Madagascar, 1 from the Philippines, and 1 from Nigeria, and they're in-house with our children. And Doctor, you'll realize how many of these children did not have family stability. And these nuns have become surrogate mothers to these children, and their impact and our program is huge and tremendous. We also have a wonderful program director who's very competent. We have therapists, we have teachers, but our religious sisters are there to provide continuity and some stability for the children in their lives.
You know, Father, and you mentioned that many of these children do not have family stability, and in that, it's something that perpetrators, maybe not traffickers in of themselves alone, but perpetrators have said how they identify the child that they're going to choose to have be their victim. And they said, I looked at them after several times, they weren't accompanied by a strong paternal figure. So they were vulnerable.
Absolutely not. And one of the things that's a very disgraceful national statistic is 42% of our children who are trafficked by their primary caregiver. According to the Department of Justice, over 60% of the children who enter into the foster care system, and I'm not saying 60% of all foster parents traffic, but 60% in their foster care journey eventually become trafficked.
Wow.
And, you know, our experience has been higher than the 42%. And it's just a tragic reality when the State Department says we want family reunification. We say, no, I don't think so. You know, that was a problem where these kids came from.
So in this home, do the girls, do they live there? Do they go to school there? Or do they go to school somewhere else? How does that work, and what is the best, I guess, transition for them?
Well, the girls do live there all 24 hours a day. And the sisters actually live with them on the same floor. And this is very, very helpful to the girls because a lot of times the trauma from their being made slaves comes in the middle of the night when they'll be crying or they'll be, the light will be on. And the sisters live on that same floor and they can go to them and comfort them, put their arms around them, listen to them and help them to get through that kind of time. Another thing that happens in this is that the girls often, when they first come, will sleep in the closet. Again, because when they were trafficked, the knock would come on the door and they'd go in there and get them out of bed. And so they find hiding in the closet for a while a good place to be. And it's real happy time when they can get back into their beds.
When they move back to the beds, we realize that they've come to trust us and feel like they're in a safe and a secure setting. But in answer to your question about our children, it's all in-house. We have therapists, we have group therapy, we have trauma therapy, we have addictive therapy, we have individual therapy, and we also go out for equine therapy, which works very well with the children and the animals. But our children go to school there. They're there all day long. They do not have free access to the internet or to cell phones because many of the children lived and died on their cell phone because that's how they were trafficked in today's electronic age. They do have a registered call list by the Department of Children and Family Services, family members they can speak with. But other than that, they're totally in our care. And we go out to the zoo and we go out on outings, we go out on field days, we go to movies, we do all these different things. But the children have their safe place in our facility.
How many places are there like this in the United States? I mean, I know you guys are involved in something that's so beneficial and so helpful, but I have to believe that the beds available are minuscule as opposed to the need.
That's very true. In the United States, the total number of beds we can find out are like 700 for everybody. And for those that are juveniles, they're 250 or less than that. So the numbers are just unbelievable.
One of the things that we found, we work with Congressman Ted Poe, former congressman out of Texas, and we also work with the Order of Malta in the United Nations. And there are 50 million slaves worldwide. The United States consumes 10% of our slaves. So that means 5 million people are trafficked in the United States annually. And one of the things that Congressman Poe always reminds us of, because he was head of the Victims' Rights Caucus, he said in the United States, there are more than 5,000 animal rescue shelters, each shelter housing 100 to 1,000 animals. There are less than, like Father Chuck said, 750 beds for victims of human trafficking, less than 200 for juveniles, and it's estimated, here again, by the United Nations that 60% of the market in the United States is juveniles. Unfortunately, there's an increasing demand for young boys. They now make up about 30%. So when you look at the fact that there are 3 million juveniles, 2 million other adults, and we have over 500,000 animal shelter rescues and less than 700 beds for humans. I mean, I have nothing against puppies and kittens, but for God's sakes, what are we doing for our children and for those people who've been enslaved?
In your experience, when you come to understand the stories of these young children and their backgrounds and what they've gone through and the trauma, the repeated trauma of being raped over and over again for months and years, what is the common theme in terms of what they're told, and who are the people that are trafficking them? Who are the people that are consuming sex from minors?
Well, one of the things, and if you saw the movie The Sound of Freedom, it's a powerful story, but it's not our story. It's not Nicaragua, Colombia, and Honduras. And we're not trained special ops people. We have had 85 children in our care in the last 5.5 years. 82 of them have been U.S. born. 78 have been from Louisiana. The others have been from other states. We've only had 3 internationals. And our children have been trafficked by boyfriends. Our children have been trafficked by families. Our children have been trafficked by employers. Some of our children have been groomed and trapped on social media apps, on the internet. And some of them have accidentally, through Facebook, gone on and said, hey, I'm at a party and I want to go here. And man shows up, because they're always trolling these websites, and said, yeah, your friend Cindy told me you want to go to Donna's house. So she asked me to come pick you up, and they find her 14 months later in Los Angeles in the porn industry, and she's drug addicted and she's catatonic. And, there's so many different ways that children are groomed.
And to the second part of that question, in terms of what do you all come to learn in terms of the consumer? There's 2 ways of consuming child content, either through pornography and child pornography, or actually raping underage kids. Who's doing this? Who's consuming these children?
Well, most of them are men, of course. And the men, it's a man thing. And unfortunately, they think there's no victim in this. And it's a very sad story when you realize that the men of the United States, and there's not much prosecution of the men. They call them Johns, is what they call them, and there's not very much prosecution about it. The whole trafficking thing there's high payoff for very little consequence. I understand that a young girl that's trafficked can make $100,000 to $160,000 a year for its pimp. And when pimps get caught, the consequence is very little. So mostly it's a man thing, and I think fathers really need to step up to teach their sons what it means to be a man and what sexuality means, and to use sexuality as God gave it to us.
And therein lies that point. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And Doc, the other thing is that pornography is a $152 billion a year industry. We as priests can tell you that it's a real issue in confession with males. And now, bearing in mind that these are the people who are trying to have a relationship with God and going to confession, I can hardly imagine what the other group of people who are not trying to live a Christian life are dealing with. But when you talk about 152 billion, let me put that in perspective. By the NFL, by Major League Baseball, by FIFA World Cup, and take every 18-year-old in this country and give them a 4-year scholarship to Stanford University, that's not $152 billion. You know, the reason why the United States, it consumes 10% of the world's victims, it's a golden rule. Whoever's got the gold, they make the rules. And the prosecution, and this has got to be a large effort. We put together a 5-state conference where we get everyone who's had a touch in the life of a trafficking victim, children's advocacy centers, Department of Children and Family Services, judges, children's hospital, emergency room workers, lawyers, legislators, DAs, and let's try to figure out how can we become more effective, because as long as there's a market, like Father Chuck says, it's low risk and it's high profit. And, and so when people are listening to this, we need to understand it's not just a question of opening up a bed. We as a society, first of all, have to respect human life more, because this is a byproduct of the devaluation of the human person. And it's getting worse, not better. We increased 10 million worldwide victims after the pandemic.
So how do we help? How does the person who's watching this go, I want to help, what can I do?
Well, first of all, if you know someone in the judiciary, whether they're lawyers, judges, DA's office, what are y'all doing? New Orleans has a couple infamous cases of very poor prosecution. WWL did an investigative report on that. And so if you know someone, we need to hold people's feet to the fire. If they're our elected officials, ostensibly there to serve us. Our legislators, Representative Lori Schlegel out of Kenner has been a real hero in trying to get these websites shut down and have age verification. As a matter of fact, I sent an article I wrote that I read on her today. She's a wonderful lady. But we need our elected officials to see this as a priority. When we look at the fact, and I'm gonna guesstimate, but if there are 5 million slaves in the United States, I'm going to tell you, in Louisiana, we probably got well over a couple 100,000 slaves. And they fly under the radar, and they don't have a voice. And that's why Father Chuck and I are doing what we're doing. One of the things we want to do is get to the household of faith. We want to go in and train priests and preachers and rabbis and imams. This is what's going on. We need to activate, and we need to realize it really is a community problem. And even if you're not directly involved in it, you know someone who may be part of the solution. And so when we're getting ready to elect a new governor, when we're getting ready to elect a new attorney general, when we're getting ready to elect judges, we need to make sure these people are on board and willing to fight this devaluation and commodification of the human person.
Well, I would love to have you both on again to talk more about this, and maybe we could work that out. And because I think it's so helpful to bring this up and to show how we can help. And it doesn't necessarily mean just piling money somewhere, although that's got to be good for,
That will be helpful if we can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. We're going to have you back on. Thank you, Father Jeff Bahi and Father Chuck Swanson, for joining us and for helping us understand the frightening and frequent reality of this crisis. We'll be right back.
Everybody in my house knows how to ride a bike except me. People ask, how your children learn how to ride a bike and you didn't? I didn't teach them. I just created an environment where they taught themselves, and all I had to do was be there.
And we're back. Dr. Roy, should we be on the look? I mean, we just heard those horrifying numbers about how prevalent it is in the United States and how few homes there are, few places that women can, or children can escape to. Is that something we could be on the lookout for? I mean,
Yes, we can be on the lookout of our own behavior and call people out. You know, we live in a society where everything is sexualized, everything is objectified, and our children are being sexualized. And so we don't think about things in quite the same ways that we did even 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And so, you know, people are looking to push the envelope, and men are visually stimulated. And so I'm going to say that this is a men's issue in some way, and a responsibility that men have to be aware of their own response to visual images. And we all know that pornography has gone up, and we've done shows before on the topic. And that's a big part of it, that men are visually stimulated, and so they're turned on by different things. And then when they are constantly looking for these types of images, that it pushes the envelope, and it pushes the envelope. And then you start to go down this rabbit hole, and you're looking at content that keeps driving the logarithm, and then there's more of a demand, and people want more access to it. And then that searching online turns into perhaps consuming in actual life.
and even if it isn't, you are still the problem.
Yes.
Look away. If you look, you're part of that problem because you are the audience. You are what they're making these movies for.
Exactly.
What
So
they're doing
men
this
need to make a conscious decision not to look at this content, and fathers need to teach their sons to not look at this content. And women and all of society needs to hold men and boys accountable, and everyone. When you know that someone is engaging in the activity of pornography, for example, that is something that's in our homes that we can just say, no, stop doing that, because this leads to that and leads to that, and then eventually leads to children being raped repeatedly and sold on the black market.
And that's a true line.
And that's a true
not,
line.
oh, you're pushing the envelope. No, that is a true effect from looking.
And with the causation, the correlation piece of it, it increased significantly during the pandemic when everyone was closed down, and then online use increased.
Wow. Oh, tip before we go.
Yes, so it's important that we know that human trafficking is not just someone's problem, it's everyone's problem. So know that you are deeply responsible for this in some way. So it is not someone else's problem, it's our problem, and we need to address it.
Okay. Dr. Roy, thank you so much for talking things through, and of course our guest today, Father Bahi and Father Swanson, for joining us and helping us with this. We also want to thank you for watching and being a part of Coping Today.